Welcome everyone to the Akron Public Schools Board of Education regular board meeting on 7 November 2022. We call this meeting to order and thank everyone for being here. We will start off with a roll call. Mr. Pendleton.
Dr. Akbar.
Here.
Mr. Alexander.
Present.
Dr. Hall.
Aye.
Mrs. McKittrick.
Here.
Mr. Perry.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we do have two board members unable to be here today. We will move forward to the next item, which is Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Alexander, do you mind leading us? If you are able, if you could stand, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Our next item of or order of business is the introduction of our Scholar Board members for 2022 to 2023, as well as their oath of office. So I thought maybe we would start with Mrs. Whitfield to introduce our board members, and then we will do the oath of office.
Good evening. I'm Dreamer Whitfield, and we have our school year 23 student board members with us. First, we have Cochise Griffin, who is from East High School. You can stand. We have Elliot Jackson from Garfield High School. We have Frozen Azimi from North High School. We have Casey Anderson from Akron Early College. We have Willem Bloss from STEM. We have Anderson Rambler from Firestone. And we have Abigail Kearns from Ellett. And before they say their oath, each student will have a 1-second introduction, and we'll start with Cochise.
Hi, I am Cochise Griffin. I am a junior at ECLC. I am in the Bridgestone Automotive Pathway. This is my second year returning as a student board member, and I'm also a student athlete, with my sport being football. My team recently made it to the state football playoffs. I am passionate about students feeling like they belong and have relationships within the schools.
Hi, I am Elliot Jackson. This is currently my second year serving on the student board. I am currently a junior at Garfield CLC. I am in the business management pathway. I am also a student athlete. I played a 3 and a 4 on the Garfield basketball team. I am passionate about students switching their mindsets to do what's right even when no one is looking. I'm ready to get a kickstart for student input and change the game on the way students think and the students' opinions on topics.
Hi, my name is Frozen Azimi. I'm from Afghanistan. I'm a junior at North High School. My pathway is biomedical science. I speak Farsi and Dari. Because of my struggles in Afghanistan, my family had to move to Dubai. Then we had to move to Sri Lanka. We lived there for 3 years. I came to the United States in 2020. I'm passionate about helping students and families have a good education and have good jobs.
Hello, I'm Casey Anderson, and I'm a junior at Akron Early College High School. I have a twin sister named Kaylee, who also attends Akron Early College. I participate in ballet and contemporary classes at Nan Klinger Excellence in Dance, and I am passionate about my future and the future of all scholars at APS.
Hi, my name is Willem Bloss. I am a sophomore at STEM High School. I am in the environmental engineering pathway. I am a student athlete. I'm a catcher for Firestone Falcons baseball team. I am passionate about helping students make connections with people that will last outside of high school.
Good evening. My name is Anderson Rambler. I'm a sophomore at Firestone High School in the Akron School for the Arts. At Firestone, I'm a member of theater and choir. I'm passionate about using this opportunity to communicate with the board and share that communication with my fellow students.
Hi, I'm Abigail Kearns. I am a senior at CLC, and I'm in the Hospitality and Tourism pathway. This is my third and final year as a student board member. I have recently been accepted into the University of Akron and have been awarded with the Presidential Scholarship. I am passionate about students learning to control their emotions and their behaviors.
Thank you very much, and I think everyone here will join me by saying I think we are in good hands on the student board. So without further ado, I'm going to deliver the oath. If each of you could stand, please. All of our student board members can stand. And I will share bits of the oath, and you can just repeat after me. So kind of like call and response a little bit. So if you could just repeat after me. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States? Yeah. I don't know. That's what it says. I think all you got to do is say I do. Yeah, that's how about that. That's the way it's read. Okay, we're gonna do this again. I'm sorry. I'm like, why is it reading like this? All right. So, do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that you will perform faithfully the duties as a student board member of the Board of Education of Akron City School District, Summit County, Ohio, to the best of your ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereinafter to be enacted during your continuance in said office and until your successor is qualified and appointed? If you do, say I do.
I do.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the student board. Thank you very much, and that concludes that section of the board meeting, and we look forward to having each one of you join us at this table at some point throughout this year to hear from you and your experiences at your schools. So next we have community and school reflections from our board members. Any community and school reflections? Okay. Hearing and seeing none, we will move to request to address the board. And we do have 7 individuals wanting to address the board. And if I mispronounce your name, please charge it to my eyes and not my heart. So Mike Harkness looks like the first person. I just wanted to, you have 3 minutes to speak, and you can speak at that podium there. And we're asking that you speak no more than 3 minutes, and to not make any disparaging comments towards any one administrator. If you do have a complaint about a person who works for the district, please let us know, and we can take that concern in executive session.
I do.
Oh, you do?
Is that good?
Okay.
I accept that oath too. So.
Oh.
Just want to make sure I'm
I thought you were
on
saying you did want to go to executive session. I got you. All right. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Harkness. I'm an intervention specialist at Glover CLC, and I've been an employee of Akron Public Schools for 12 years. I'm also a product of this school system. I'm a member of AEA's Board of Trustees and am the chair of the membership committee. I'm speaking to you this evening as an AEA elementary representative on the district's Joint Expulsion Review Committee. I would like to give you a brief history of the district's response to severe student behaviors which compromise the safety, security, and instructional integrity within our schools. As some of you may know, in 1989, student assaults on teachers had reached critical levels. At that time, concerns about violence within our school buildings were so high that AEA and the school board negotiated and established the Joint District Expulsion Review Committee. This committee was comprised of both teachers and administrators and would convene to review student violations to the student's code of behavior twice a month. The advisory committee would meet with the district hearing officers and discuss details regarding students' behaviors and then recommend to the hearing officer the proposed outcome based on the severity of the violation. In most instances, both teachers and administrators spoke with one voice. We also generally would approve and propose with one voice lesser consequences than what hearing officers generally wanted to prescribe. That process worked extremely well for decades, until about 2016, as serious student behaviors began on the rise again. It was the association's position that the administration was not only violating the language within the Code of Student Behavior, but was also withholding critical information regarding student violations of the code, manipulating data, and hindering ERC members' ability to ask pertinent clarifying questions, and obstructing the ability for the committee to successfully support teachers and students within Akron Public Schools. Because of this concerning behavior by the administration, AEA held a safe school rally at the administration building, and AEA President Pat Shipe had addressed the board that evening. My colleague, Janelle Brown, will give you a brief summary of the action regarding the events which occurred after the Safe School Rally. It is imperative that you seriously listen to all my fellow educators speaking here tonight, because the reality is our buildings are increasingly not safe. Our students, our educators, and our educators deserve genuine leadership from this administration, and we believe that that is simply not happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harkness. We next have Ms. Janelle Brown. Mrs. Janelle Brown. And the same spiel applies. I think everyone heard it. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Janelle Brown, and I am a 5th grade teacher at Sam Salem CLC. I have been an Akron Public Schools teacher for 26 years, and I'm also a proud graduate, 1989 Firestone High School at the time. I have worked in many buildings and have taught several hundred students of our school children. Excuse me. I am the AEA Elementary Vice President, and I'm speaking to you this evening as an elementary representative of the district's Joint Expulsion Review Committee. I have been a member of the ERC for many years, and I would like to give you an overview of some of the Akron Board of Education's commitments that were made following the 2018 AEA Safe School Rally. During the rally, several school board members came outside and spoke to teachers, voicing their interests and vowing to address their concerns in a meaningful way. After AEA President Shipe addressed the board that evening, both the board and the administration spoke to various media. They stated their commitments to address the student behavior issues. School Board President, Mr. Patrick Bavo, stated, "We hear their concerns. We take the safety of our students and staff very seriously, and we look forward to working with them and addressing their concerns. We have a responsibility to make sure everyone feels comfortable. No teacher should feel unsafe in a classroom. We need the kids safe. We don't need to hear profanity in the hallways. We don't need to hear teachers being threatened," he said. Within weeks, the school board proposed the formation of a committee to include teachers, parents, students, community members, and corporate partners to discuss student violence within APS schools and seek out ways to address, the issues. There was never, and I'm going to repeat, there was never any focus on actual solutions, and therefore, this committee disbanded shortly afterwards. While aggressive student behaviors began to increase at an alarming rate, the district's ERC ability to monitor and review those violations began to dramatically decline as the administration began to misrepresent, manipulate, and even conceal information needed for ERC members to make truly informed decisions regarding how best to support students and those who were impacted by their actions. The administration's continued desire to sanitize data for appearances rather than address the reality of increasingly violent student behaviors became blatantly obvious, even to the point that the former director of Student Support Services openly admitted that he would violate the agreement and AEA could just deal with it. My fellow ERC members and I are respectfully asking this board to hear and act on what we are saying to you tonight, as we believe that the decades-long positive impact that the Expulsion Review Committee has had with supporting the students and families of Akron Public Schools has been and continues to be seriously eroded by the administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have, is this Son Cepello? Did I say that right?
It's Lon Seplo.
I'm so sorry. Mr.
I'm not
Cepello.
offended.
Right. Thank you very much for being here. Sorry.
Well, thank you for having me. Hello, my name is Lon Seplo, and I'm a certified librarian at Bookdale CLC. I've worked within this district for 12 years. I've lived within the district for about twice that time. My students both attend school at APS. I'm a Board of Trustees member with AEA and also the chair of the AEA Grievance Committee. My remarks here tonight reflect my appointment as a middle school representative on the district's Joint Expulsion Review Committee. As my esteemed colleague Janelle Brown just stated, after the 2018 AEA Safe Schools rally that was prompted by literally dozens of verbal and physical assaults on teachers and students, our members overwhelmingly voiced their concerns regarding the need for the administration to authentically collaborate with the AEA and the Expulsion Review Committee. Regrettably, our hopes were not realized, and quite frankly, the violence by students in our buildings increased to the point that on October 13th, 2021, just a little over a year ago, the Akron Education Association's Board of Trustees passed a no confidence resolution in this administration for their failure to transparently and collaboratively work with the Expulsion Review Committee in an attempt to slow the ever-increasing amount of unsafe and violent environments in which a small percentage of APS students were creating in our schools. Again, we would ask the board to recognize that prior to the last few years, the Expulsion Review Committee had an over 30-year history of successful partnership between the administration and the educators in this district, effectively working together towards a positive review of student behavior outcomes. That is simply not happening now. Teachers are clearly not being heard or listened to in any meaningful way by this administration regarding classroom and building safety. We feel that AEA members on the Expulsion Review Committee are treated dismissively, indifferently, and in some cases disrespectfully. I ask you tonight for your consideration of our concerns. We're not overstating the severity of the problems we bring to you. We ask you to recognize the dire impact that these unchecked actions are having on our dedicated educators and students. Teachers are leaving the district. Students and families are leaving this district. This administration is ignoring us. We need this board to hear us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seplo. We now have Mr. George Nemstopko. Did I say that right? I know I didn't.
It took me years to learn to say it.
Can you say? I'm
Nenesto.
sorry. Nenesto.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
But
no,
Mr.
that's
Nenesto,
just fine. Thank you.
the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is George Nenesto. I'm a teacher at Higher Middle School. I've worked as an educator in the district for 22 years. I am the AEA's second vice president and middle school representative of the district's Joint Expulsion Review Committee. After AEA's Board of Trustees passed a no confidence resolution in this administration's mishandling and violations to the long-established role of the Expulsion Review Committee, the superintendent and her leadership met with AEA's leadership team and their members of the Expulsion Review Committee in January of this year. At those meetings, many of us here tonight presented the administration with honest, concise, and factual data and evidence supporting our concerns. We discussed at length the troubling circumstances which we believed were leading to increased violence in our school buildings and classrooms. Commitments were made by this administration to work with AEA towards solutions to some of these issues. And while we did see some of these changes surrounding building security, like additional safety team members, increased use of metal detectors, and more staff training on lockdown safety drills, we unfortunately have not seen any desire by this administration to engage in truly collaborative action in support of the work which AEA and the Expulsion Review Committee members could contribute toward the efforts to restore safety and order in our schools. As we secure our buildings as best we can from outside violence coming through the doors, we cannot and will not lose focus on the violent behaviors we are dealing with every day inside of our buildings. We believe that this administration is far too focused on the appearance that their selectively chosen numbers and data show rather than the reality at hand. We are here tonight to tell you that we have tried to work behind the scenes with this administration to promote genuine partnership through existing and proven systems like the Expulsion Review Committee. In order to restore some trust and confidence in our teachers and students so that we can come to work and school every day without fear of becoming victims of violence. It is what we should all expect of this board. It is certainly what we all deserve from Akron Public Schools. However, the support is not there from this administration. It has not been happening. We are not being heard, and the administration is ignoring us. We are asking the board not to treat us with the same contempt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Alana Treen. Did I say that correctly? No? Okay, please help me. Help me out.
Elena.
Elena.
Treen.
I did get the
you
last name
right. You got the Treen right.
Okay. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Elena Treen, and I'm an educator at East CLC. I've had the privilege of teaching the children of Akron Public Schools for 8 years. I'm a member of the AEA Board of Trustees and the chair of AEA's Legislative Committee. I am here tonight as a high school AEA representative on the district's Joint Expulsion Review Committee. My colleagues have expressed to you some of the details of our growing concerns because of what we see as this administration's complete indifference and lack of desire to meaningfully engage the members of the ERC regarding student behavior outcomes. My colleagues and I have experienced this firsthand. We are in the room. We are at the table. We are the Expulsion Review Committee. We see it week after week. Continually, our input, our experienced advice, and recommendations are received by this administration as merely cursory compliance demonstration. In far too many cases, hearings are held and students are returned to buildings before we are even asked for our input. Let me be clear. If the ERC's input and recommendations are not received until after decisions have already been made and final actions have been taken, then the only conclusion we can reasonably come to is that our feedback and participation is not wanted. As we have said to this administration before, the mere act of receiving or sharing information is not collaboration. It is dismissal, it is disengagement, and it is disrespect. I want to underscore what my fellow educators have said here tonight. Teachers are resigning from our district in record numbers. We are being ignored by this administration. Administrators at all levels are leaving our district. They are being disregarded by this administration. Students and families are walking away from our schools. And our students that stay are increasingly sitting in classrooms supervised by inexperienced and underqualified staff. Why? because this administration is not retaining our experienced educators, in large part because this administration ignores teachers' concerns about student assaults. That is unacceptable and continues a cycle of inequitable outcomes for our students. Akron Public Schools are at a crossroad. Please know that we genuinely want to be part of the solution. However, we cannot and will not remain silent any longer while this administration's hollow promises and inept responses create unsafe spaces for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Dan Richards.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Got that name right. Thank you. So my name's Dan Richards, friends. I've been with the Akron Public Schools now for 27 years. I'm currently a school counselor. I've been a teacher and a school counselor in 3 of our Akron high schools and enjoyed all 27 years. I'm a member of the AEA Board of Trustees, and I'm the chair of the AEA's Student Adjustment and Behavior Committee. I'm also here, of course, tonight as a representative of the high school end of the Expulsion Review Committee. As my fellow educators have expressed this evening, we just can't continue to keep our concerns behind closed doors. We're just past that point, waiting for the administration to work with us to make our schools safe for students first and staff. We have all been present at many, many meetings with this administration, where we have clearly expressed our recommendation for addressing student behaviors. We have participated in dozens and dozens of expulsion review meetings, during which it's obvious, as my friends have stated, our inputs are it's just not being considered. We've lost confidence, honestly, in the administration and in the ERC process. We're going to continue to abide by it, however. The words that we have heard just don't match the actions. Far too often, we feel like we've been paid lip service with our concerns, voicing our concerns with no real support or concrete follow-up afterwards. We just don't see a willingness for open collaboration from the administration on that regard. What we do see frequently is this move to positively spin troubling, incidents solely for appearance's sake. We've seen that repeatedly. We've witnessed firsthand statistics and data being changed or manipulated or tucked away or hidden that we can't have access to anymore when we used to support an embellished overview of student behaviors, which simply does not reflect the reality of the situation in our buildings. We're here tonight representing all the Akron Public School educators and staff to tell you that we have seen too much. We want to be positive always and make a difference in the lives of our students and families every day. We have not chosen to be educators in this district because we have to. We choose to be here because we want to be here. No doubt about it. I think that's true for all of us. Our students and families deserve dedicated educators advocating in their best interest, which is our goal, I assure you, always. Our educators will continue, I assure you again, to support the process of the Expulsion Review Committee, even if APS leadership does not do the same. And I just ask you tonight respectfully to please listen to the voices and the real-world perceptions of the practitioners that work with students, staff, and families directly every day. And I thank you kindly for your time.
Thank you very much. And the last person we have is Jim Purge. Hopefully I got that one right. Only took me 7 times. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. My name is Jim Purge, and I retired from the Akron Public Schools in 2012 after 36 years with the school system. I served on the Expulsion Review Committee over 25 years. The last 10 years, I was a representative from the Akron Alternative Academy. I'm also the proud father of 3 boys that are Akron Public School graduates. I'm deeply troubled by the current direction of the ERC process. Due to a lack of collaboration and engagement this administration has taken with the AEA members on the committee. The system was put in place many years ago, and it worked. It worked very well. It was fair and equitable for all involved. The ERC recommendations regarding outcomes for students were reasonable, objective, and almost always unanimous. The ERC was always a joint effort between the administration and AEA members. The group met in person at least monthly and more often when needed. All members were given detailed information regarding student behavior incidents, excuse me, in order to make informed student outcome recommendations. Each incident was discussed in an open, honest, professional, confidential manner. Again, these recommendations were leveled, thoughtful, compassionate, and what was in the best interest of the student was always the center of the discussions. What I believe has been lost over the years, however, is a focus on all of the victims of disruption and violence in our schools. While we need to always keep in mind the best interest of the students requiring adjustment for inappropriate behaviors, we cannot and should not ever forget that there are many victims of continued violence in our schools. If educators' voices are not heard, if their concerns are ignored, if the administration adopts a dismissive attitude towards authentic collaboration, you will continue to see teachers, good teachers, leave our district. I don't think we can afford that. If we forget the majority of our students who must sit in classrooms and watch while a small group choose to disrupt learning, then those students become victims also. They're having their education taken from them every time the learning stops because of violent disruptions. Remember, please, the neediest and most fragile students suffer the most from chaos in the classroom. Many of these kids face conditions at home that leave them vulnerable to distraction and negative peer influence. We all agree, all of us, every student has value, but we must also remember that troubled students can exact a terrible toll on their classmates who are just trying to do the right thing. While at the same time, a tone-deaf administration can exact a terrible toll on educators who are made to feel undervalued and invisible. I'm asking you, board members, tonight to please listen to these professionals. These are good people. These are the backbone of our district. What they do on that expulsion review committee should not be window dressing. It should be meaningful, it should be impactful, and it should be worthy of the attention that I believe it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. As that concludes our request to address the board, we will we would thank you for all being here. And one of the things that I wanted to share with everyone is that I hope that we together can work together to, have the best outcomes for all of our kids. And so we appreciate you. Dr. Hall, I'm sorry.
So first off, to our student school board members who are here tonight, this is, I think a great example of the importance of the job of school board members and senior staff, superintendents. You've also are hearing from leaders within schools and leaders within our teachers union, and we all should be on the same page. We all should be good partners to each other. And so I'm especially thankful that you are all here tonight, because this is something of substance. And I'm not a fan of having you all be involved in ceremonial and meetings that are fluff only, right? This is a very meaty and content-rich topic and meeting. And so, as a board, we don't comment on the content as a general policy and rule. We don't comment on the content of what is shared in addressing those who address the board. But however, I do want to comment on the credibility of those who just address the board. So I was taking notes on the positions that you hold, the time of years and service. And I think I lost count at approximately 200 years of service in this district teaching our kids. And so while I'm not in a position to comment on content, I do want to say that that the 7 of you who addressed the board tonight, the credibility that you all bring in what you were marked upon in your comments was not lost upon me. I doubt it was lost upon my colleagues. And so again, I want to thank you for having the courage. Because this is not easy to come to a board meeting and get up and and talk about the kinds of things that you all talked about tonight. These are not easy topics, and moreover, these are emotional topics as well, right? These are very emotional topics, and some of you who know me a bit better know that I come from a family of APS educators. My mother, my grandmother, my uncle, my aunt either taught or still teach in the Akron Public Schools. And so this is dinner conversation for me, right, growing up in current day. And because I know that this is such an emotional topic, I want to also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for the professionalism that you brought to your comments. It would have been very easy to get up at that podium and sort of rant and yell and rave. And yet you were all measured and very temperate and professional in your remarks, and I want to thank you for that. And I think also what you all deserve is a response from this body. And so I think we'll be. I know that we will be working in concert with senior staff to ensure that a suitable reply is presented in a timely fashion to what you all brought up tonight. And so, again, I want to thank you for the time that you took, because, again, you have families and kids of your own that you are not with because you are here putting our kids first, right? So, again, I want to thank you for the time that you came to spend. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for professionalism, and look forward to reviewing this topic very soon. So thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me the time to comment.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for being here so far. For the sake of us actually getting our students out, and actually, I want to say a few things to our students. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll come back and we'll have our 5-year forecast presentation. So we stand in recess at 6:21, and we'll return in 5 minutes. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome back to the regularly scheduled board meeting on 7 November 2022. We just returned from a brief recess, and we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a presentation from Interim Treasurer and CFO Ryan Pendleton on our 5-year forecast. Mr. Pendleton?
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Thank you so much for joining the 5-year forecast tonight, to those here and in person and online. For the next 20 minutes or so, let's review the district's forecasts. And we've titled this Post-Pandemic Reality. We're going to show you and hopefully string together a list of these forecasts and kind of the unprecedented times that we've been in from when we first went into the pandemic and the variations. We're going to call out some things that are noteworthy, that are hot topics that you've been hearing about, the discrepancies in the forecast, and what assumptions are driving. So post-pandemic reality is our theme. We're going to focus more on expenses than we are on revenue today because it's really impacting the district's trends quite a lot. Obviously, that's led by ESSER. So we've tried to frame everything in pre-pandemic, pandemic during, and then post-pandemic. And then wrapping up with state funding forecast and some House Bill 920, which we've been away from for a while, but it's having a real impact on our books. In May 2022, this was the district's forecast. And I want to highlight the differences between forecasts, because as you remember from 2020 and the preceding forecast, things were they were bumpy. Right? They were quite a bit different. And so we're back to a place that pre-pandemic of how forecasting went. Things are much more predictable. We're in a tight range with what we're predicting and actually seeing. And so I just want to do that call out there. In May, we predicted a closing balance of $113 million and change. And now in November of 22, we've got some more data under our belt, we're closing out at $108 million. But if you compare and contrast all those bottom lines moving forward, we're back into a tight range. So from a CFO treasurer's perspective, things are much more predictable, right? And we're going to have this call out at the very next slide. One of the most pressing questions and hot topics was, why have the numbers been so different between during pandemic forecasts and now? And if you remember, in the November 2021 forecast, we stood right here and we issued a charge. And the charge was, we're just collecting so much data for these unprecedented times. We had just come off the heels of ESSER 1, $10 million. And just again to frame that, ESSER 1 was the equivalent of almost all of the funding that we got during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, 2012-ish, of ARA. You remember those times. A lot of us sat around the room, and that was a big move then. So $10 million, that's ESSER 1. Then ESSER 2 happened, $40 million. And then ESSER 3 happened, $96 million. So all told, just under $150 million that the district needed to plan and consume and then sustain. So plan, consume, and then sustain. And so the big highlight here, and one of the questions I'm getting daily right now, and I know it's out in our land, is about this $100 million difference. If you go back, and I will link for those of you who don't have a copy of it, the November 2021 forecast. Go back and watch it. Go back and look at the presentation. We issued a charge to the organization. We were saying it's going through a lot, and we have to consume primarily these ESSER $3. How are we going to do that? And we've not shied away that we took the majority of those dollars and we put them into the district's forecast to say we have yet to plan these ESSER 3 priorities. And I know all of you live that. So one more chart that I've used in presentations here, a little bit busy, but if you look at the screen here, these are the last 6 forecasts. And when we talked about returning back to a level that was much more predictable, is from 2018, 19, 20, and now back to the 22 forecasts, things were much more predictable. So,
Mr. Pendleton, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
Can you go back a slide? Just to be specific here, because this has been put out into the public about the $100 million discrepancy.
Right.
Can you point out, so to the person who's watching this, where would they have seen a $100 million discrepancy at?
It's out in fiscal, assuming 24 and 25.
Mm-hmm. So it's an aggregate number.
It's an aggregate number.
Okay.
And again, thank you for that question. And board member question is, what are the assumptions behind the forecast is the important part of the message. And that is we were going to take some large portion of these ESSER III dollars and, we didn't have formally adopted plans shared with the board, and likely a lot of that was supplant. Very clearly, I think one of the titles of the slides was reset. And in November, I said, in May, we must bring you a plan for those ESSER III dollars.
Yeah, so that's a question because, for example, if you look in fiscal year 2025 in the November forecast, it says 164 is the ending balance. And then November 2022, fiscal 25 says 85 million, right? So the question is, well, why is there that delta, which gets back to the assumption? So again, not putting you on the spot, but just, if you wouldn't mind just sort of one more time, kind of just with granularity kind of walking through, okay, why am I looking at such a huge difference in ending balances? Because even if I look at fiscal year 2024, there's a $58 million difference. Then I get to 2025, and it's, almost $80 million difference, right? So,
right.
And then if you look at 2026, it's a $104 million difference. So folks who, and we hope the public watches these meetings, right? So as they're watching and they're saying, okay, wait a minute, now that you've called this out, matching up the items here. Can you tell me one more time?
Sure.
Why there's this difference? Because again, because I know publicly we've used the word discrepancy, right? Well, that word's been used. So I want to make sure that we're being very crystal clear about about what contributes to the difference here, right? Because one thing to say that there's a discrepancy, one to say that there's a difference, right? So I'm not here to be the author of what words we use, but words matter. And so as we're looking at this, if you could just, again, as I tell my daughters, I tell them, talk to me like I'm a golden retriever, So I'd ask you to put it to me the same way, like in that simplistic terms. I'm the golden retriever tonight. Put it to me as if you were explaining it to a golden retriever.
I'll reiterate the words you gave to me. It absolutely isn't a discrepancy. Not only was it not a discrepancy, it was a transparency tool to say, here are the assets that we have. There was no legal requirement to list them in a public 5-year forecast, but we did so. We did so to show a transparent impact of how are we going to plan, consume, and sustain $150 million. So it was to highlight the issue. And the charge in the November forecast was, we must come back in May and have a plan for ESSER III. That was the charge, of which we did, and of which we continue to do. And you'll see throughout the presentation, we're going to update you even on the ESSER gas gauge and slide. And so you'll have, I'm sure, additional questions. So,
for example, we're looking at 2024, the 164 $58 million difference. Again, I'm going to go retriever here, right? So $58 million difference, why?
$58 million difference is because we took a large portion of those ESSER III dollars and we supplanted it back to the books, saying, can we absorb all this spending? right? And so what I like to do to put it into perspective about the size and scope of our budget, right? Our budget's about $350 million. So we, in a very short period of time, just over 1 year, just like when you look at what one school year, one fiscal year, we absorbed more than 35% in addition to our overall budget. So how are we going to plan for those dollars? So the difference is we took a large portion of that ESSER dollars and we put it into general fund to say, we have these resources. Now we're going to plan for them. We absolutely could have not listed them in the forecast. We could have shown them off books and said, we'll figure this out as we go along, but we put them here and presented on those ESSER 3 plans. So in revenue, in expense reduction, because primarily ESSER 3 is a reimbursed process, right? It's a federal grant. So if there's something in general fund that qualifies for that expense, we can shift that expense. Different from all of our other federal grants, we can supplant this. Now, it was easier during the whole virtual year of operations because everything qualified. So we could go back and rebate much more during that period of time.
Right. So the point is that for folks who are watching, right? Most people are watching. So let's use fiscal year 2024, right? My expenditure there is $312 million, which is equal to any balance of 164. To your point, we absorb. So for example, now we plan for it, right? So now we're showing a $30 million increase in expenditures year to year, which would account for in large part why there's a difference in those values. So again, we do these public board meetings because we want people to watch, hopefully become more informed in the watching mode, right? So I know if you don't work in finance, this is something that I chart, so that's why I'm trying to make sure that there's a connection. So this year 2025, we had November 2021, we had a $334 million expenditure, and then now we increased that by $30 million as well, right? So that starts to provide some examples for why there's differences between the end of 2041 and the end of 2022 forecast. Moreover, the other comment I'm going to make is that this all came before the finance committee first. We saw this before the whole board saw it. So from a process standpoint, the finance committee gets a chance to ask their questions in the finance committee. So what that could lead to is that you may not hear as many questions.
You may not hear as many questions, excuse me. You may not hear as many questions in a board meeting because some of those questions have been asked and answered in our finance committee meetings, which are also open to the public as well, right? So again, I just want to make sure that we're, being transparent with with those who are watching on that account as well. So, okay, I'm sorry. I know that I've slowed you down, but again,
Not at all.
Yep, Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Yep, Mr. Alexander.
Yeah, and Mr. Pendleton, you mentioned transparency and showing these dollars that where they're at so we can show the public that where we're spending and so forth. If we showed this again, and you talked about supplanting, and if you didn't have the supplanting numbers in there, would this show in deeper deficit or would it show the same? Because it sounds like we're supplanting the money, the money's not there, but we're putting this ESSER fund in there so it helps us. But if we didn't have it there, it would show this bottom line a deeper red. Is that correct?
It would, yes. And as we progress through the presentation to tonight's adopted forecast, you'll see now we have two forecasts back to back, which are real. That was the first slide that I showed. Now things are in that predictable range again, where they weren't during forecast season or during pandemic. How could you, with $150 million coming into the district, of which have all federal strength? So yes, it would have showed a much bigger deficit.
Right, and I want to make sure too, since like Dr. Hall said that the public is watching, that they understand that if those monies weren't there, those red figures you show would be even higher. So, but we're trying to be transparent to let everybody see where the money's going, what's happening, that it's shown there, and it's kind of caused a little bit of confusion for us trying to be transparent and be honest to show what's going on. So by doing that, it kind of caused a little discrepancy and not knowing. But when you say it's a plant and you said you put those monies in there, that means if those monies weren't in there, everybody needs to know that bottom line will be deeper, and we get deeper and deeper into the hole. Those numbers will get, as we move up further throughout the years, that those numbers will get higher, negative numbers. As far as in the red, we will get deeper in the red.
They will.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
And I have one question as well. If you go back to the last chart, if you look at the differences in the revenue, in the expenditures from 2021 to 2022, I just wanted to ask because the increase in expenditures don't seem to be totally aligned with how much we got with ESSER. So I wanted to just get an idea of what all those expenditures were, because they could be more than what's allotted with ESSER. And then in one case, it looked like it might be less. So,
yeah, it would not be totally aligned to full 150 million. One, because ESSER 1 was used solely during our virtual operation. So every expense qualified for the use of ESSER 1. ESSER 2, in a large part, was also during while we were virtual operation. There's a federal ceiling, though. Some of you who are aware of federal funds, we had maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity ceilings that we could use the funds up to. So it would not, if somebody was trying to match up expense to expense, fiscal year to fiscal year, between the November 21, November 22, they wouldn't come up with a full amount. If that's, I'm sure we've covered that in Finance Committee. If that's important to the board, we'll come back and tell you exactly what those differences were, because they're known assumptions and expenses.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to make an accusation, and I haven't been to the finance meeting, so I apologize. It was just something I noticed and wanted to get clarity on, so thank you.
Thank you. Very quickly, this is the last 6 forecasts. We'll add the 7th one here after tonight. And what you'll see is from 18 through May and now November 22 back to that predictable range, which will be in this range. And the 2 out years, which are highlighted because we did include it for public consumption in our forecast, you just heard the narrative about why. All right, post-pandemic reality. And so I know I show a lot of numbers and graphs, so let's pause and frame the next few slides. Yes, post-pandemic reality is impacting us in terms of products and services. Inflation is impacting us, the entire organization, labor shortage, and house prices on inflation. On each one of the slides, if you see the little action down below, you see pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic. We've highlighted each one of those areas just to show you that if you eliminated the pre-pandemic, you maybe just eliminated 2019 to 2025, you would see what was normal during forecast season. You would see that line continue to trend up. This is personnel. So between personnel and benefits, it's 70-some percent, 75% of our overall operations. So we're going to highlight this, and you see the flattening of our expense with the start of the pandemic in 2020, and you see the decline in 2021. A lot of our expenses qualified for ESSER funds. We were virtual operations, so we had a lot of hourly and part-time labor that wasn't needed. We had the same on supplies, materials, and other. You're going to see it much more pronounced there. But during the pandemic, things started to recover. We started to develop those ESSER plans and the use of these one-time funds. Now post-pandemic. Now really, even though we're not quite there, we still have a little bit of time left with our ESSER funds. That's what tonight's forecast represents, is post-pandemic sustainability. Because we've got 2 forecasts, again, back to back, that are very reasonable that are now tight in terms of our estimates. In December of 2020, this was a quote after a forecast. And remember, this was early on in our ESSER allocations. In a sense, we bought ourselves a year. The only thing I would change is, in a sense, we bought ourselves a couple of years. That's the only thing that I would change from that quote then to now. And hopefully that resonates throughout here. Now, all expenses, I'm not going to bore you, well, maybe I'm boring you, but I'm not going to bore you with all of the slides on revenue and expense. So here's a summary. This is all expenses in general operations. You can see the pandemic's impact down below, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic, and the disruption we had to our daily walk. Here, I just pulled one out to show you supplies and materials and the impact of the pandemic. I know that's a small percentage over to the left. That, again, in 27, we're only predicting that that's 3% of our overall budget.
So can you go back just one slide? Excuse me, pardon the interruption. So I'm just looking at, so ESSER fully expended here. So ESSER is fully expended in fiscal year 2025. So if you watch previous board meetings, we talk about September 2024.
Correct.
Is a date when those things must. So that's fiscal year 2025, which is what you're highlighting here in the slide. Some might ask, well, why are you calling 2025 post-pandemic? So are we talking about that from a healthcare standpoint, or from a, or that's meant to describe from a, I'm sorry, what? No. So are we saying post-pandemic from a sort of healthcare standpoint, or are we saying from a budgetary standpoint post-pandemic?
That is the entire budget.
Okay.
So that's the 350, that's what, 360 million. So, but thank you for the reminder. What are the assumptions driving that chart? The assumptions on the expense side is for all years that are not negotiated and out years, we include a 1.75% increase cost of living with the inclusion of steps. Steps on average for all employees across the district is about 2%.
Well, so that's my question, right? That's
Yes.
kind of where I was going. You know, like we're assuming 175, but in the last contract period, it was somewhere in the twos, right? 2.2, 2.3, 2.3, approximately.
That's right.
And so my assumption would be, and I'm gonna be careful what I say here, but my assumption would be, as we look out, I can't imagine that we'd have a rate that would be below that. And so as we're looking at these numbers, it assumes 175, but these numbers are actually probably higher from an expense standpoint because we're going to be above 1.75. Well, we already are above 1.75 in the current that just ended, and we're probably going to be above that again and moving forward as well, right? Because if we were at 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 approximately, again, I can't imagine a scenario where we would be less than that moving forward. So so these expenses are actually probably going to be higher because of that. And so the question I had is, you know, if I'm a percent higher, if I'm going from 175 to, let's say, 275, what impact does that have on these numbers here from an expense standpoint? Should I see, you know, we have 4,000 employees times how many man hours? What am I looking at from a fiscal year to fiscal year? What impact from a expenditure standpoint does a 1% increase have in expenditures?
1%'s about $2.5 million above and beyond. That's all employees. All employees. So to answer your question,
you said $2.5 million? It's
about $2.5 million. So you've got about $5 million in the second year. You calculate retirements and attrition and those kind of things. So all told, we got between $20 and $30 million of additional expense by the fifth year of a forecast.
So it compounds.
It compounds, correct.
Okay.
Again, just to restate, all the out years, all the years that are not currently under a bargaining contract are assumed at a 1.75% increase in base wage increase.
Right. So we went up to 275, just for an example here. That'd be about a $30 million impact over 5 years.
It would, yes.
Okay. So you had a previous slide, and I'm sorry I should let you get to your slides here, but I just want to ask these questions. There's a slide that talks about the levy, right? The levy's still in near future. So, just in my own sort of research, and I think you've actually brought this here too. The highest levy we've ever put through in modern history is 8.9 mils. We've gone 7.9 the last couple of times.
Correct.
So what I don't know the answer to is a 7.9 mil levy. Again, that's over. Usually we go every 6 years, right? So the levy, so those dollars have to last us to 6 years. What would I be looking at from an increase? So if we pass a 7.9 mil levy, how many? What is the impact financially? So for example, how much additional revenue would I expect from a 7.9? So I guess I'm saying, like, for each mill, how many millions of dollars additional should I expect to see in each fiscal year?
From our finance committee, I added that slide a little bit later.
Yep. Okay.
We'll get there on that one.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking the question is because we're fiduciaries here, and so for me, and I'm speaking as one board member, the one thing I want to make sure we're doing is any levy that we would pass has to cover an increase in expenditures, right? So I'm not here to take a side and or comment inappropriately about negotiations, but for me, I just want to understand the millage and want to make sure that as we're thinking through increases in salary that I want to know what my right and my left limits are from a levy standpoint. So levy passes at 8 mils, that equals X millions of dollars. Either that's going to cover my increases in expenditures or it's not going to cover it. And if it's not going to cover it, then that's a whole other conversation that we're not having today. But that's where I'm trying to kind of drive the conversation and make sure that I'm calibrated around that too. So okay, so I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
So all right. So we've covered this one. All right.
Mr. Alexander has a question.
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just have quick. We talk about Dr. Hall was talking about a levy, and if we have a levy and we have to collect funds, how long does it take for us to collect funds, and then how easy is it for us to or not to collect funds?
Again, we have a slide for that.
Okay.
I think if we,
All right.
he's
Okay.
going to have some slides, I think, that are going to
I'll let you go because I had a question about the compounding too of the percentages.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, from Finance Committee, we had a pretty robust discussion on this very point, so we included a scenario here. We did just want to put the gas gauge back up for you. First is, why are we showing the gas gauge? Because it does have, if you haven't taken that away from tonight's presentation, ESSER funds have an impact on our general operations. It has a very clear impact on our general operations. So expended about 30 million, planned, proposed about just under 60 million, and remaining or contingent about 8.3. And so this is a lifetime chart. Anytime we need to update this, we can. All right. At the very beginning, we talked about the agenda spending so much time on expenses, so we are going to finish out with facility needs, because facility needs will have an impact and have had an impact on our general operations. We're going to talk about 034. We can talk about some LFI dollars, all of which are framed on the next page. But our legacy buildings, again, I just want to maybe set the record straight, frame it that beginning of the facilities plan 20 plus years ago, enrollment during that time was over 30,000 students. There was legislation passed around choice. There was declining enrollment, and the state of Ohio and that partnership of them around 60% and Akron around 40% of sharing in that cost had an updated enrollment estimate maybe 2 or 3 times. where it ultimately showed us and funded the last final building, that's Garfield High School, but well short of all the buildings that we entered the program with. So just take the opportunity to set the record straight that we would have been, if our enrollment would have been above 30,000, we would still be in building projects completing the remaining part of these legacy buildings. Also, to set the record straight, that pre-pandemic, we were levy eminent. We needed operating funds. Therefore, Brian, why didn't you plan for permanent improvement dollars? Well, if we need operating funds, that is the primary source of money, revenue, to enhance and protect the classroom. So that was the obvious choice. We also knew that the tax burden was really high, and that we also knew we needed every bit of the 7.9 mils passed in 2012. So there's no room to pass additional PI. Again, back to that quote, we bought ourselves a few years with these ESSER dollars. This is a new slide and ad from Finance Committee. I just want to highlight those funds that are used and talk to you about whether or not recurring or one-time, but show you the history here. The Permanent Improvement Fund back in 2018 had a cash balance of $1.6 million. You remember during that time, housing prices were increasing, so the inflation, House Bill 920, we're going to talk about here in 1 minute, but the current cash balance of the Permanent Improvement Fund is about $88,000 in the red. So we still have a little bit of collections yet to go, but it will likely not produce any meaningful dollars for us to use on any of our legacy buildings and projects. And for a district our size, it is uncommon for us not to have PI dollars in substance. So what are we doing with our PI millage? That was part of our commitment to the city 0.25% income tax in the state of Ohio, is that we transfer $3 million a year into the 034 fund, which is a requirement we have to set aside of about $500,000 to take care of these new CLC buildings. LFI dollars, we've talked about this a number of times at JBR. We've got initial conversations with the city. LFI dollars, locally funded initiatives. After all the projects are done and settled and the state says you're reconciled and you can move on. So, and we're talking $675 million over 20 plus years. These dollars potentially are available in joint use between the city and school. And so I say potentially because there's an agreement that governs that about the city could have related infrastructure and or debt service needs. And anyways, this is one-time funds, and the current balance there after getting closer to the closeout of Garfield High School is about $14 million.
So if I could jump in here,
yes,
with a couple clarifying questions. Number one, the CLC. So is it permissible for us to use 034 funds to address legacy building capital needs? Or can those dollars only be used for maintenance of existing CLCs?
034 can only be used for CLCs.
Okay. So important clarification. Question number two, the LFI funds. So for example, as I recall, in touring Garfield, and Ms. Folk, clean me up here if I have this incorrect, but I believe Hammond told us that we came in approximately $5 million under budget with regard to the expenditure of building Garfield High School. Am I north or south of the actual value? Uh-huh.
And we have an 11-month walkthrough to go through, so we are not ready to say that that is the total. That maybe we are under budget, but I will not tell you it's 5.
Okay, so when they threw that number out when we toured the building, they hadn't applied caveats, is what you're saying?
There's still been some changes and upgrades and changes to it since we have opened to secure and finish out the retrofits that need to be done.
Roger that. Okay. And then my second question is with regard to LFI funds. You mentioned partnership with the city. right? So
Yes.
So are all the dollars that are listed in the cash balance, are all those dollars a result of us coming in under budget in our building process?
No.
So
Locally-
meaning what portion of these dollars, I'm not asking for exact numbers here, but what portion of these dollars have been contributed by the city? So that $14 million there that's in 2022, that's inclusive of the surplus from Garfield. Is that correct?
It is not.
It is not. Okay, so if we end up, and I know there's a big if here, probably not going to happen, but if we come in under, so let's say it was $5 million that we came in under budget for Garfield, that $14 million number would be $19 million?
Yeah, the House Schools Facility Commission has segments over the last 20 years. Segment 6. We have 6 segments. Segment 3 is reconciled and closed. Segment 4 was over budget. Not substantially, but over budget. Between 4, 5, and 6, we will reconcile those, and there will be a plus or minus delta that will come back and either settle from this dollar or add to this dollar.
Okay.
So no to the full $5 million coming in because I know segment 4 was over budget.
Okay.
And closeout takes a long time. Closeout takes a year, year and a half, sometimes longer. And remember, 4, 5, and 6 all happen back to back. So that's not that's the norm. That is normal for us to be in that perspective, but it will settle out of the LFI.
Okay, so it's retrospective reconciliation we're talking
It
about.
is,
Okay.
yes. And the state drives that process as the co-owner, and then when they sign off on it, then we have free use to use those dollars. The difference in Akron, which is different than any other community, and we're very blessed to have that, is the local share came from a 0.25% income tax championed and in partnership with the school and the city. So normally it's a bond issue that the school passes or it's a levy that the school passes. This is a very unique circumstance and the city's passed that 0.25%. So when we say that there's this governing agreement that will ultimately have to be agreed upon between the city schools, and that process will be through JBR, to say, is there a related infrastructure that falls within that broad scope of what the millage was passed for? But it is only for this scope of work. It isn't for anything else. So like nobody can use it on salaries at the city or schools or anything like that. It's got to be used dedicated to this. Of course, we're transitioning between, call it master plan number 1 and master plan 2, which the superintendent and staff and cabinet have been working on, the long-term operational plan. So we're in master plan number 2. So of course, we would like to use these funds to bridge because they're just one-time funds. And specifically those that aren't covered in 034, which are more for the CLC.
So can the LFI funds, once we have finished the reconciliation process, can those funds be used for to address needs that we have in our legacy buildings?
With the city schools JBR process. So you have the value set of what the millage was passed for, which is broad. It was very broadly written, just like most operating levies, because you can use it for this, this, this. So they list all the purposes. And then just like every state, local decision that we've taken through JBR and joint decision, we would do the same thing with the LFI. It's still governed by that body.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. So essentially, in order for those dollars to be released for us to use to address whether it be legacy needs, we would need the city, our partners in the city, to basically sign off on that plan.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Well, so listen, here's an opportunity. I mean, I know we're off the state of the schools address. I mean, listen to Ms. Fowler-Mack talk about it's my plug here, right? We talked about what great partners the city of Akron has been to us. And so looking at these burgeoning capital needs that we have that service the kids' future of Akron, my assumption is that the city itself I'm assuming here, maybe I'm assuming a lot, but I'm assuming that the city of Akron leadership would would want to be supportive of us using these dollars to address our legacy buildings or other capital expenditures. And so I look forward to having that conversation in subsequent either JBR meetings or perfectly here, since this is the public venue. That I think is probably the most appropriate to have some of these conversations. But so basically, we need to be lobbying our city partners to ensure that they're going to agree to release these funds to us. Okay. All right.
One last thing on this slide before we move on is the 034. I just want to draw your attention to 2018. We had about $18.8 million in that balance. And again, that's a transfer that we make internally. It's into perpetuity. We're required to place that there to have safe and proactive maintenance of our CLCs. It's part of the state's contract with us, and that's why an 034 fund exists. However, you can see that that $500,000 is not sufficient, and our current balance is just about $14.8 million. So again, it underscores the need. Why are we drawing this attention now? Because we're entering this phase 2. We're entering post-pandemic reality. We have legacy buildings that need addressed, and we have shown you some one-time temporary funds that we have available. We've shown you the same and the ESSER impact, and now how will it impact the district's operations moving forward? I'm just going to highlight revenue very quickly. I'm going to skip over that slide. This is a question I'm getting quite a lot lately. With housing prices on the increase, why isn't APS seeing the same increase in revenue? And during Finance Committee, we talked a lot about that. And I know that circle doesn't highlight the substance here, but it's just to draw your attention. In 2020, we had a reappraisal. So for those of us who are living here, on average, residential and commercial taxpayers saw an increase of 12%. So our revenue should go up 12%, right? No. It's House Bill 920. So I want to show you just a pretty busy slide, but I want to draw your attention to 1988 and a levy that was passed at 6.5 mils and is now collecting 3 mils on residential. That's the impact of House Bill 920. And we did just calculate it before the presentation today. So in 2020, right there, we had reappraisal here in Summit County, and you see its impact is 2 years later of when it shows up in our revenue. So how much is that? It was a 5% increase in revenue. It's in the forecast and part of our revenue story. So we lost over 5 mils, the equivalent of a 5 mil levy because of House Bill 920 in that rollback. All right, let's wrap up. This hopefully, Dr. Hall, Mr. Alexander, and the questions that you had, I wanted to throw out an extended 5-year forecast, wrap up here. I think this is my last slide. Let's see. I have one more slide after that. I have to show you the one that we're going to adopt. This is an extended forecast with a levy scenario. There are the assumptions. In November of 2024, for a scenario, I'm not making that recommendation, we're not making that recommendation, but just so you can see, the first half collection, Mr. Alexander, of that 7.9 mil is 11 million. A full collection is that 22.6. So it takes a while for it to get fully into and build into the forecast and adopted. You see the ending balance here, and you see the ending balance without the levy. So without a levy, and I've cycled these 3 years, I've circled that because our negotiated agreements will impact these 3 years. Without a levy, this is what you'll see. And again, what's driving that? A 1.75% increase on base wages, about a 5% increase in benefits, and a 3% increase on the revenue side with that 5% increase in real estate. So 3% increase on state formula aid going out in each of the future years. And so just draw your attention here to the ending balance with a levy. This is what it looks like. Just so you can start to begin to plan. We're early stages of that conversation, I know, but we wanted to include this. Any questions here before I move on to the last slide?
Yeah, I actually have a question. And recall, I'm the golden retriever in the room tonight. So again, let me ask this question. And again, because I don't understand this. So when we know that in the last fiscal years, 2020, 2021, and 2022, if we knew that our base wage increase was somewhere in the low twos, right? Why do we continue to model 175 as a base wage increase for 23, 24, 25? Because as I said at the outset, I can't imagine that we would end up in less than where we were in the last 2021, 2022. I'm sorry, 2020, 21, 2022. So why would we not model and use a larger number? That's the first thing. And then secondly, one of the things that I would find helpful is if we could see some other scenarios modeled, looking at 3, 4, 5%, to look, so that way we could kind of see what the impacts of that would be. Again, I use this word fiduciary all the time, but that's why I'm asking the question, because I want to understand that better. And then I had one other question about a previous slide, but I'll table that question for now because I know that others may have questions about this slide in particular. But then again, and then also too, make sure I'm following folks who are following this at home. The line that reflects the 7.9 mil levy is contained in what line here? Can you just use your pointer to point it out?
So that's the increase in revenue, and so it's reflected in this ending balance.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's the cumulative impact of the annual revenue. That's not cumulative. It's the annual revenue. We see an additional 11 million, full impact of 22.6, and then it grows a little bit with property values and.
Gotcha. And then my last question, I think it's my last question, is the fair school funding formula. So starting in February, Ohio starts debate on the next biennium budget, which would be for fiscal year 2024 and 2025. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so we are receiving additional dollars right now as a result of the fair funding. So in this biennium, which is 2022, 2023. So the question I have is,
correct.
For 2024 and 2025, are we going to continue to see the increase in funding because of the fair school funding formula, or is that yet to be determined?
Okay.
So I guess what I'm asking is, great that we passed this fair school funding formula, it was bipartisan, yada, 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 but is that something that they have to renew every 2 years, or do we automatically get the increase in revenue for a longer period of time, or is that something that has to get negotiated every 2 years?
Okay.
Because my worry is that, as I'm editorializing here, my worry is that if we happen to have a downward turn in our economy, are we looking at a scenario, for example, 24, 2025, where they say, you know what, we have this formula that we agreed to, but we don't have the money to fund it this biennium, so we're just going to go to the default for that biennium, and then maybe in 2026, 2027, we go back to the fair school funding formula if we can afford to fund it. So that's my question, because again, I just want to make sure as we're lining up base wage increases with levies, I think the other point here was make sure that this body understands the impact of the fair school funding formula. Is that money that we can count on, yes or no? I guess is kind of what I was trying to get at.
Got it. Okay, first question, 1.75. Why do we include that? We've had many a public debate about including a placeholder in the forecast. There are two schools of thought. I met with my colleagues a few weeks ago in Northeastern Ohio, and we asked this very question. and the room was split 50-50. About half of the room included a 0%. So a 0% saying they've not authorized anything, so why include any placeholder and amount? And the other half of the room used some placeholder between 1% and 2%. Okay. And why did they do it? And so ultimately what we've chosen to do, what I brought to this district is placeholder that protects the dramatic swings in the district. So what I mean by dramatic swing. So you know if we forecast a 0% on a base wage increase and you settle for something other than that, in your earlier question about $30 million of what's 1% do over 5 years is $30 million of cumulative expense. Your stakeholders will say, we can't rely on your numbers. They're so dramatically different just because you negotiated a contract. So the idea here is to put a placeholder in. The reason we don't go above and beyond that or below it, it's a reasonable placeholder. And it also does protect the negotiated process because most items in the negotiations process have a financial impact.
Right.
Right? So they're all partnered together. And the goal there, again, to be transparent, I know a lot of that happens during the negotiation process in confidence, but it's to show the impact on the district's finances so that the stakeholders, meaning all of us, taxpayers and the like, can make decisions for a forecast that's reasonably stated. So that's why we do a 1.75 instead of a 0, so you don't see $50 and $100 million swings over the life of a forecast. Other scenarios. We will add the other scenarios to future finance committees and board meetings because I think we'll need to. I think following this presentation on not only the personnel side of the equation, but the capital planning and these use of these one-time funds and our capital, like you're going to want to see, so we will include that for future presentations. And finally, fair school funding plan question. We're currently seeing and is in law that we have about $8 million. And your question is, yes, it is in law through this fiscal year. And the budget process starts in February with the governor's handoff to the House and then the House to the Senate. We'll be debating all the way up until midnight on June 30th, I'm sure. And we will advocate for the full implementation. However, advocating and assuming its passage is not something that is a responsible financial position to take. Because it's in a sense saying to, much like we would do if we were going to put a levy on the ballot, we wouldn't assume out in public that you're going to pass this operating levy. So it is subject to the state's approval every 2 years. The current General Assembly cannot tie the hands of the following General Assembly.
The 335 is inclusive of the 8 million.
It is inclusive of the 8 million and includes a 3% compounded in all years out, which is more aggressive than we have seen in the past 25 years.
Roger that.
So I have placed an assumption and a bet in the forecast that we're going to continue on because we know the state has not touched its rainy day fund. We know the state's collections are at some of the highest that they've ever been. But we also know that there's a debate about reducing income taxes again. Yeah. And there's a potential future recession coming, which could have an impact. The last time this happened, we saw 3% almost overnight decrease to our state aid and a single line item action by the governor. So 3% is an aggressive assumption placed on our revenue for state aid.
So your numbers here in the revenue column, revenue line item here, below beginning balance. So all the way out to 2029, you're assuming that the Fair School Funding Act, that the Fair School Funding formula is being funded.
There's no assumption of full phase-in, no.
So not here.
There is not.
So in 2024, I guess what is the assumption in 2024 as an example? So that 341 is
341 assumes that over our current state funding we receive, we'll receive 3% in addition to that.
Okay.
In that same meeting I talked about with my colleagues around northeastern Ohio, we talked about what are you assuming for state aid?
Yeah.
and half the room was at 0.
So the
Because
3% is independent of the Fair School funding formula.
It is independent of
Yeah.
the Fair School funding. It's not using the mechanism of the Fair School funding plan. Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So the other thing I'd like to understand is, as we're modeling scenarios, is if we assumed full implementation of the Fair School funding formula, out for the next 5 years, how would those revenue numbers change?
Sure.
Okay. I think that's my last question.
That's the last slide. We show that last slide because that's what the board will be adopting here in our resolutions here shortly. Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pendleton. Next, we have our approval of the previous meeting minutes from the regular meeting minutes from 24 October, special board meeting, board retreat on 29 October, and special meeting on 1 November. Up for approval. We'll accept a motion to approve those previous meeting minutes.
I so move to approve.
It's been properly moved by Mr. Perry. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Dr. Hall. Any discussion on the motion to approve the previous meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote, please. Mr. Pendleton?
Mr. Perry?
Yes.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes, abstain from 4.1.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have personnel recommendations. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Good evening, members of the board. I am recommending, I wish to recommend the approval of the personnel recommendations presented in categories 5 through 16. I'd like to call attention within those recommendations is the unfortunate passing of one of our own Akron Public Schools staff members, Mr. Orlando Green, who was a coach with the district for 30 years as a freshman track coach at Buchtel CLC. He was involved in both track and cross country for many, many years, and even 1 year was a wrestling coach. Orlando passed recently and unexpectedly, and he left a significant void both in the school and in the community at large. Most assuredly, our students are going to miss him. His wife also is a staff member at the high school. So in recommendation 16, we are recognizing him.
Thank you very much, Madam Superintendent. It's been properly recommended for personnel. Is there a motion on the table?
So moved.
And properly moved by Mr. Alexander. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Mr. Perry. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes, I actually have a question.
Dr. Hall.
Dr. Barr. So 5.4, item 5.4, this is Ms. Sorovi. She's a current substitute teacher, and we're recommending placing her into this academy prep position. I see that we're using ESSER $3 to fund that. So my question is that first off, if we didn't have ESSER $3, would we be able to do this? And number two, once ESSER dollars are expended in 2024, and this is an example of something I've brought up before in these board meetings, right? So thinking about sustainability. So is this the kind of position that is going to be funded beyond September 2024? Or are we looking at this person essentially being out of a job when the ESSER $3 are completed in their expenditure? And I ask the question because this is part of a larger, tip of a larger iceberg, in that there's a lot of positions that we're funding predicated upon ESSER dollars. I think part of that is school counselors in every building, right? And so that's why I'm asking the question with this as an example. Is this the kind of position that we would see cut when ESSER dollars are completed, or is this the kind of position that we have a sustainability plan in place that would keep somebody like Ms. Sorovi in her position? That's my question.
Sure. The Academy sixth grade seminar course is a course that we have offered as a part of our enduring framework in each of our schools. And so we would be looking to, I can't speak to exactly this person that is being recommended here tonight, but I do know that course, is a part of a model that we continue to follow in our schools.
So I appreciate that. And so this kind of gets back to what at least I'm looking for is a bit more granularity around sustainability, right? So as I just articulated, there are a number of positions that are seemingly tied to ESSER $3. So this is one where you're saying that this position as opposed to the person, right? So let's make about the position. This position is a needed position that we would see continuing on post ESSER 3. And so, but there are a lot of other positions that are also seemingly tied to ESSER $3. And so what I would like to know, I think it's only fair, is I'd like a better accounting for and/or a plan that allows us to be fair with our staff as relates to sustainability of roles that they're currently in. As I've said before, folks who have house notes and car notes and kids and start families, and I don't want to see a bunch of people, seemingly, out of a job when ESSER $3 are expended in fiscal year 2025. So that's my request. I just would like to understand that better. And I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that plan presented to this body or a committee yet. So again, because I'm just thinking about our people who take care of our kids and how do we ensure that we're taking care of them and allowing them to plan for their families too. So
absolutely, we will bring forward some additional information. We are in the process of working with the finance team around, kind of our sustainability modeling and how it is we step down from these one-time funds. In the meantime, I think as we saw shown in the five-year forecast examples even tonight, we are leveraging those resources while we do have them for allowable expenses so that we can extend our general fund dollars and to make them stretch. And we've been able to do that in ways that have allowed us, since the start of the pandemic, to really hold off that levy imminent status. And so here's another place where using a traditional district model where we do have an allowable expense to place it on those funds. And we do realize as well that we want to be fair to our staff and to give them a strong sense of if their role is secure with us. So some of that modeling is intending on some attrition that will take place, but to the best of our ability, we will share some additional information with the board.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, I don't take issue with using ESSER $3 in that particular way. Again, it's the planning portion of it, right? And so I appreciate your comments and look forward to seeing the modeling that you've just referenced. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call vote, please. Mr. Pendleton.
Mr. Perry?
Yes.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. McKittrick?
No on 5.4, 7.4, and yes on the balance.
Thank you. Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We now move to resolutions and motions on the consent agenda. Madam Superintendent.
Yes, sir. On the resolutions and motions, I wish to recommend approval of those resolutions and motions in Category 22. They are in proper format, and I move for their approval, please.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion on the table for resolutions and motions?
So moved.
Thank you very much. It's been properly moved by Mrs. McKittrick. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Dr. Hall. Any discussion on the motion? I actually have one question. It's 21.5 from ODOT, the $300,000 compensation. I'm wondering about whether that payment is for some damage that's already occurred, anticipated damage, or just for our use for any autonomous purpose that we want.
I'm going to ask Deborah to come to the side. Thank you, Deborah.
This is actually a negotiated amount for the take permanently or temporarily during the construction project, and once received, it goes into your permanent improvement fund to be used as the district decides to put forth its property to be used. So no, there's no restrictions, and it's not for damage. All righty?
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call vote, please, Mr. Pendleton.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mr. Perry?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to business affairs recommendations. Madam Superintendent.
Sure. I wish to recommend the approval of the business affairs recommendations presented in Category 23.
Thank you very much. The business affairs have been recommended. Is there a motion on the table?
I so move to approve.
It's been properly moved by Mr. Perry. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Dr. Hall. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing and seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote, please. Mr. Pendleton.
Mrs. McKittrick?
No on 23.2, 23.4, 23.5, 23.13, and 23.15. Yes on the balance.
Thank you. Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mr. Perry?
Yes.
Dr. Hall?
No on the same items as Ms. McKittrick, and yes on the balance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to Superintendent's report. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. Just 1 minute, please. I'm going to switch my notes. All right. I'd like to start off with our usual, talking about Be Kind 330, because we're still in the midst of really working on the climate and culture of our district, and also encouraging those around us to join us in embracing kindness as something simple that can make a real difference in the lives of all students and staff. So Thursday messages are something that we've begun to do, and we've challenged our staff to put a positive message recently on pumpkins. So Becky Oram is one of our consulting teachers who, along with the PAR, the Peer Assistance and Review team, created a positive pumpkin message and posted it to social media. That is a tongue twister to actually even get that out. But we do thank our staff members who have embraced the notion of spreading kindness and really are not only doing that within their schools and within their roles, but also are spreading the word using social media as a way to influence our broader community. World Kindness Day is November 13th, so that's coming up very, very soon. So we're also sending out some messaging to our partners at large, which are asking for those throughout Akron to really make a concerted effort to acknowledge and to do acts of kindness, and then to capture those and to share those back with our students and staff so that they know that others are with us. So that will be happening, and we invite the board members too to think about something that they can do as well on that World Kindness Day next week. I'd also thought we would use this opportunity to share some of the happenings with the board and board members that I thought would be of note to you to know what's going on. So first of all, we have been working very diligently planning for the return in our district of one of our own, Rita Dove, the poet laureate. She is coming home, and she's going to speak in Akron on December 7th, and she's going to actually be doing something very special at Buchtel CLC, which was the school in which she graduated from. The focus of her time with us is going to be the poetry of social justice. And so we're hopeful that early on that you can mark your calendars for December 7th, and we're really going all out and working to make sure that her homecoming is a success and to engage our students early on in some creative writing activities so that they're prepared to share their writings with her and to receive tips as well. So that is underway. I also have a number of persons in our district that I thought you would want to join me in congratulating, and so we would start with our marketing instructor, Eric Matthews at North CLC. He received a recommendation and actually an award from the Harvest Business Schools Club, the Samuel H. Elliott Award for his leadership in education on economics. And actually, one of our APS parents was the one who nominated him, but he was recognized nationally for his efforts and is right in our own backyard. Also, we have a science teacher at East, Michelle Hillier, I think her name is, who not only is a science teacher, but also is a practicing artist. And one of her pieces has just gone on display at the Butler Art Museum in Youngstown. And so, and some of her art has also been accepted commercially by Myers grocery stores for promotional purposes. So we have staff members who are also following their passions as well. We also, you might have noticed in the paper over the weekend some of the coverage that was done to cover the seminar, the summit, the Black Men in White Coats Summit that took place, the Youth Summit. And so we want to offer thanks to Summa Health for hosting that Black Men in White Coats Youth Summit and for allowing many, many of our students to participate in that. Students learned about orthopedics, ophthalmology, internal medicine, and more from physicians. And not only were there speakers there, but many in the white coat community also came out to support our students. Lastly, I would also like to extend thanks and appreciation to the Akron Community Foundation and the fantastic leadership of Darlene Schuler for the work underway to ensure that our middle school students have essential experiences and exposure to community organizations, much like is the case at our high schools that are focused, the essential experiences there are focused more on the career pathway types of awareness and internships for our students. At our middle levels, we really focus a lot on community organizations and ways in which our students can understand how our community works and ways that they can contribute their skills. And so we really want to thank the Akron Community Foundation and Darlene Schuler for their work. This is a year where we have tried to deepen our work at the middle schools and lift that up, and we are finding some success and really wanted that to be in the forefront of the board's minds to know that. I also had the opportunity last week to meet and greet another community group that is very committed to our young people, and that was our Leadership Akron Next, the 11th class, I do believe, who spent the day at Mason CLC for their Youth and Education Day. And one of those persons in that leadership class looked familiar and then happened to identify identify herself as a former educator in our district and actually the mother of our own Larry Johnson here. And so it was very surprising to see ways in which our very own just continue to show up in many different forums, but remain extremely committed to our young people. And so some of those persons who are, giving of their time, their talents, and their passions are really doing a lot to impact our overall message that we're pursuing excellence in all roles and in all places for our students. So just thought tonight it would be helpful to lift that up to the board. I also did want to say that we did have with the speakers here tonight, I will be following up with the staff members to make sure that we're able to sit down and dialogue, because we not only want to be able to celebrate things that are happening in positive ways, but also to address concerns. And chief amongst those is to ensure the safety and security of all of our staff and all of our students, which is paramount on my mind. And we've talked many different times about the efforts being made to ensure that our buildings are safe and we're able to focus on our primary objective of educating our young people. So there will be follow-up, and then we will bring back some information to the board on that topic as well. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any discussion for Madam Superintendent? Hearing and seeing none, we will move on to the President's report. Just a few things. One, I want to thank everyone for attending our retreat last weekend. I think it went very well, and wanted to give another thank you publicly to our consultant, Deborah Wright-Keys, for leading us in that great professional development. Also, I had the opportunity last week to speak with the residence educators, the year 4 cohort, and I think that they were some phenomenal teachers in our district. But the other great thing about them is they were not shy. They asked very great questions and also gave some outstanding suggestions and recommendations for us to consider. And I did take some great notes from what they made suggestions, as well as some of my takeaways, and I did send that to the full board and to Madam Superintendent, and did subsequently have one of them follow up with very, very much so, I think, detailed information around what we can do better together. So I thought that was really positive, and appreciate that teacher and everyone in that cohort for just inviting me and having a great conversation there. The other piece that I wanted to share is just I wanted to say that the State of the Schools address last week on the 1st was pretty good. And we loved the new format. I think that it was very well received by everyone. So thank you for that. And I think that it was a good, public display of the positivity that our district has, and also the greatness that we have. And the students obviously were on full display, and just, as always, phenomenal and just appreciative. So thank you for a great event and great words as well. And then lastly, two last things. I had the opportunity to go to the Freedom Fund dinner yesterday, and in the ad booklet, there was a really great ad from APS, and I just wanted to commend the communications team, because I think we're seeing some phenomenal ads coming out of that office that I think are really powerful. So thank you for that. And then lastly, I know Ms. Alexander was there as well. We had an opportunity to go to the Just Hillbro event on Saturday, I think it was. It's all blurring together, but I thought that event was really great. There was young men from middle school maybe age all the way up to the mature age, and I think that was a powerful event for young men to be authentic, but then also to be able to talk to one another. And I don't want to speak for Mr. Alexander, but I think that it was just really powerful. So I'm glad I was able to make it. So with that being said, that's my report for now. And next meeting, I wanted just to put it out there. Coming up, we will be thinking about in the next few weeks. We'll have to do a vote as a board for our chair, our president pro tem for the organizational meeting in January. And so I wanted to put that out there in advance if anyone wanted to do that, to start thinking about that. And then also officers for next year as well. If you would like to be an officer, feel free to let myself or Dr. Hall know. And with that, that concludes my report. Any discussion or questions? Ms. Alexander.
I do want to comment on the event that we went to Saturday. It was very, very powerful, and I would suggest if they come back with something like that we try to get as many of our young men as we can to attend, because it was very powerful. I'm optimistic in a lot of ways, but in this way, I mean, it was very, very good for me. And I was glad to see Dr. Akbar there too. It was very, very good. But if they do have another one, take a lot of our young men, because they will be worth their while.
Thank you. All right, hearing and seeing none, we will move forward to the next item, which is Treasurer's Report. Mr. Pendleton, anything else for us?
Thank you, Mr. President. One comment tonight. I just wanted to draw your attention to next week is the Ohio School Boards Association Conference, and highlight one of your own members who has been asked by the Ohio School Boards Association Executive Director and Board to present with the Fair School Funding Plan, Mr. Alexander. So he's going to, I think, lead us off in that presentation. So look for that presentation 1 o'clock on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's also a reminder that we will be there next week. I didn't mention that, so thank you for that. Any questions or discussion for Mr. Pendleton?
No, I just had one comment. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation tonight, Mr. Pendleton. I thought it was very informative, and I know that there are some follow-ups, obviously, that are going to follow, but appreciate the time and that you took to answer all the questions. I know I had a lot of them tonight, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, hearing and seeing none, we'll go to committee reports, legal contracts and board policy. Mr. Alexander.
No report.
Thank you very much. And I think there is a meeting coming up, right?
Yes, there's a meeting coming up on the 21st, I believe it is.
Okay.
Which is a date I think we're trying to have a special meeting as well.
Okay. Thank you. So be on the lookout for that meeting coming up. Finance and Capital Management. Okay, both of them are not here. Well, Ms. Jackson isn't here either. All right, so I'm going to say that there's no report for Finance and Capital Management. Next, we have Instructional Policy and Student Achievement. Mrs. McKittrick.
Thank you. We're going to start with Mr. Perry.
Sure. So a few things that were discussed at the October 31st meeting. First was the GPD Employees Foundation grant, which is a $10,000 grant that's going to be used to support the Fine Arts Showcase. There was also discussion on ECHO, E-C-H-O, which is an alternative placement for some of our scholars. We actually started the school year with three scholars that were enrolled. Now there's 6 enrolled. It's a very helpful program. Next was the Community Hall Foundation, which is a service agreement to use this Goodyear Theater for the yearly May Festival of Arts, which I've never been to, but I'm definitely going to try to go to next year for sure. And last was the Wild, Peaceful, and Free, LLC, which is a program to promote wellness for students and staffs at Jennings, and provides several hours of sessions with that service contract.
Also, Marcy E. Bright gave us a presentation on the College and Career Academies. We had a new tech update regarding Bookdale and its implementation of either New Tech or College and Career Academy model. And then finally, we had a conversation around sister universities for East CLC and Bookdale CLC, because currently those are our two high schools without a sister university. So those are in process, but on hold. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Perry or Mrs. McKittrick?
I actually have a comment. It's not so much a question.
Dr.
Well, maybe a
Hahn.
question. So you mentioned East and Bookdale do not have sister universities. I'd like to better understand the process that we use to determine who exactly gets a sister university, because I look at the two schools that don't have them, and there's a lot of similarities between those two schools. And one could draw conclusions about the reasons why East and Bookdale do not have sister universities. So that conclusions that may not be accurate, but on the face, I find quite disturbing, especially when we're talking about viewing everything through an equity lens. So that's something that I'd like to better understand. And I'm not asking that question tonight, but that's something. But in the future, I'd like to understand that process a bit better. And the short answer might be that we allow the company to choose which high school that we allow the university to choose which high school they think is the best fit for them. But and if that's the case, and I would just want to sort of humbly submit to this group that maybe there's some education that we can do to make the case for why East and Bookdale should be considered for sister university status. To have a sister university, because again, it just on its face just does not seem like it's in line with our values. And so we talk about college and career academies viewing even that through an equity lens. So anyway, so that just, and again, I don't attend that committee meeting, but just hearing as a board member, I continue to find that fact disturbing.
Well, and that was part of the reason for that conversation, because whether fair or not, the implicit message is they don't need sister universities, they don't merit sister universities. Again, whether that's accurate or not, that's the perception. And so that's part of the impetus for this whole conversation is to, now in fairness, a couple of the universities have undergone leadership changes, and so that has stalled those talks. So there are talks ongoing, but there's nothing in writing yet.
Yeah, and to that point, there may be talks ongoing and changes, but we still had other high schools that got sister universities first, right? So, and again, I don't want to be too critical here, but there's difference between reasons versus excuses, and so we can talk about. And so I'll just say that I'm disappointed that those two schools were last. So because they could have been first, we could be talking about Firestone right now, or Elliott right now that doesn't have a sister university, but they have sister universities, right? Or they don't. So. I thought Kent State was the sister university for Firestone. Was that just So let's talk about this then.
Can we just share?
So they have a named partner, right? So just assume as a named partner at Bookdale, but we don't have a sister university serving as either named partner or as a sister university with Bookdale and East. Is that correct?
We will share some additional information with the board on the status of those, so we'd be happy to do that. And if you'd like for us to do that in a public meeting, we'd be happy to do that as well. I do know that in particular, the sister university that Bookdale desired was going through a leadership change. I just so happened to have been on a panel last week with their new leadership, which is in place. And so I went up, introduced myself, and so we will be able able to move forward pretty quickly on their desired university.
I'm sorry, who
but
was the desired
I don't want
university?
to put, they wanted in particular to build a relationship with a university, and I don't want to put that university on the spot in this meeting, but we'd be happy to follow up with you with additional information about that. We have made contact now that the new leadership is in place, and so we will be following up on that as well.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is that all, Mrs. McKittrick?
So I'm excited to hear more about this.
Sure.
Thank you very much. And we turn it back over to you, Dr. Hall, for Equity Committee.
Equity, absolutely. We had a very spooky meeting on Halloween. It was October 31st. And not even a courtesy chuckle from the gallery tonight. Okay. All right. I need to increase my payroll, people on my payroll, to get courtesy laughs from the gallery. Okay. All right. I thought it was funny, but anyway. So we had a fantastic, high quality, but not spooky meeting on the 31st for Equity Committee. And we began the non-spooky meeting with a request to address the board from Pastor Harrison, who really had 3 or 4 points that he wanted to make to the group. One, he was asking for a bit more clarity or further elucidation of what we spend money on, and how that money that's being spent is linked to the problems that we're trying to solve from an equity standpoint. Second point, really, that I think he highlighted was ensuring that we're being more inclusive in hearing disparate voices in the community, and highlighted. I think he also highlighted that a lot of the schools that were closed were predominantly black schools in the past. So was making that point to the committee. And then number 3 was really, and this is something that we've talked to the board about several times, is how do we work together to ensure more open access in our CLCs. And so I think he talked about how his building was being used to host or house events for the South Rangers Pee Wee football team. I'm sorry, Pee Wee cheerleaders, as an example, and was sort of asking, like, why do churches host these things when they could be hosted in schools, right? So how do we have these CLCs that, so there was some question around that. So I think further elucidation is probably merited on that as well. Just wanting to understand that better. And then also, I think he talked about the district, it should be asking more about who we are serving and who is being underserved as well. So those are the highlights from his request to address the board. To address the committee. And then we pivot to our Chief Diversity Officer update, Ms. Chapman, which consumed a fair part of the meeting, and rightfully so. She had a lot of great things to talk about. Number one, we walked through the Excellence Through Equity and DEI Advisory Team update. There was a kickoff, as I recall, October 13th, where the team did a lot of work to, I think it was 3 days of planning to develop an equity playbook, I think was sort of part of what we were going for here. And so part of it was to develop a vision and a strategy for each department, and wanting to better understand what kinds of questions we should be asking. And then also sort of what trends do we see in those respective areas, and what are some best practices to address issues that we see with regard to equity in various departments, with an emphasis on continuing to manage projects through an equity lens. Number 2, we talked about the expansion of our equity trainings for staff. I think one's going to take place tomorrow, 11/8, what I've got here in my calendar, that we're doing using instructional improvement days to further educate our staff around with regards to equity. And I think there are going to be sessions in 27 buildings as well. And so I think those dates are 11/8, 1/5, and 3/3. And then also the linkage to that is the training dashboards. And so wanting to better understand, through the use of a dashboard, who we've trained, where we've trained them, how much time they've gotten in their training as well. And not just that, but also want to understand which buildings and roles people that have been trained, and also what specific content they were trained upon. So, and I think this is important because it allows us to cross-reference our training attendance with other data that we look at, whether it be student attendance, discipline, et cetera. I know that we are engaging with the IT department, and school improvement data offices are engaged to help in the development and ultimate work in putting these dashboards together. We talked about the ERGs, and 2 of the 3 ERGs are functioning. The new and existing Employees United ERG, I believe, is meeting fairly soon. I'm blanking on the date, but anyway. And then we moved to the DEI Learning Specialist update, where we talked about the coaching sessions with the new teacher project, which again I highlighted just a minute ago, which happened on the 13th of October. That was a partnership with between Equity and Chief Diversity Officer and DEI Learning Specialist and TNTP. And it was really, I think, as I recall, I think there were 34 folks who were in the room. And the last thing I'd call out is that there's a DEI resource hub also being developed, and materials are available on the DEI hub site. And then we had Ms. Carter, who always brings a lot of energy and excitement to our equity committee meetings. And she provided a really nice update regarding the alternative resident educator licensure program. And she talked about there were approximately 40 people, I think, who've applied to go through. They're also reaching out to current student teachers and others to schedule interviews with the possibility of hire in January. We talked about how do we get out the message in other ways as well, whether it be job fairs and creating new marketing materials, and also working with Mark Williamson's office, social media, et cetera. Another part of what you talked about was how are we providing support for people who are struggling with the passing of the Ohio Assessment for Educators, and then also wanting to ensure that people who currently work for the district, working to ensure that they can all become ambassadors for the district as well. So last but not least, we talked about some board member comments and questions from the meeting. We talked about, Dr. Akbar asked about the timeline for the Excellence Through Equity DEI advisory team. I know I asked questions as to how do we choose the folks who are on that team. And so wanted to understand better. So I'll skip here. Mr. Alexander, really sort of loved the concept and the setup for the equity sessions that were to take place through the instructional improvement days. Ms. Autry asked about high school and buildings being a part of those instructional improvement days as well. And I think Ms. Chapman explained that there was a limited capacity to expand other buildings. So yeah, it reminds me. So we talked about, I know I asked about who is doing the training, right? I want to say it's like 3 people who are doing the training. Isn't that right? And so we talked about how did we provide some, or what is the proper timing and process to begin to provide some additional resources for those folks, because 3 people training the entire district that's a lot on 3 people that also have other jobs as well. So thinking about how can we pull in other people, I think more of a train the trainer concept where you're actually maybe taking people that have some existing bandwidth to help with that training. And then I also asked about IT resources, and so wanting to understand. And so again, we talked about making sure that we had the IT resources lined up to put together those training dashboards in a timely way. We didn't want to wait 6 months to have a dashboard in place, and so we want to make sure that we have the appropriate IT resources in place. And then last but not least, I also asked for the team, our chief diversity officer and Mixed Alexander, et cetera. I think we're about due for another board committee meeting. For another board presentation on sort of where we are and where we're hoping to go. So it has been several months, and so we're working towards getting that on the agenda for one of our next board meetings to provide for an equity update there, equity update here, I should say. So that concludes my update. I'm happy to take any questions, Mr. Alexander. I don't know if you have any thoughts or anything. So just clean me up here.
Yeah, no, you got everything. There's only one thing that they were talking about, data, and Dr. Pat Agley is going to be part of that, so she can bring some data to help them in their the work that they're doing. And I just want to thank Ms. Chapman, because this is a lot of work and a heavy load. The work is getting done, and so she needs to be thanked for the work that she's doing. And we know we don't want her to get burned out, so we want to make sure that we allow her the time she needs to make sure that things happen, and if we need to get more personnel eventually to help along the way. But thank you. You need to be thankful. That's a lot of work, and you've been doing this work for a number of years, trying to get it together by yourself. So we thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the Equity Committee? Hearing and seeing none, we will move forward. Thank you. As there is no unfinished business or new business, we do have a need to recess into executive session pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 121.22G1 for the purposes of considering the employment of a public employee or official of the school district, and G4 for the purpose of reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with employees concerning compensation or other terms and conditions of employment. Is there a motion on the table?
So moved.
Second.
Been properly moved by Mr. Alexander, seconded by Mrs. McKittrick. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing and seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote, please. Mr. Pendleton.
Dr. Akbar?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mr. Perry?
Yes.
Dr. Hall?
Aye.
Mrs. McKittrick?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not believe we'll have any action that we'll take besides adjourning. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and if you choose not to stay, that is perfectly fine. We now stand into recess into executive session at 8:10.